With common sense for the Commonwealth, it's the John Fredericks Morning Show. Like us on Facebook. Follow John on the new Twitter handle @JF Radio Show. And online, the website, thejohnfredericksshow.com. Listen online anywhere, anytime at washingtontimes.com/listen. And make a note of the new call-in number, toll-free at 888-480-JOHN. That's 888-480-5646.
The legislation includes a requirement that Arkansas provide voter IDs free of charge to people who don't have identification otherwise. The voter ID requirement won't take effect until there's funding for the IDs or January 1st, 2014, whichever is later.
What that disconnect between the rhetoric and action means, I'll leave to the analysts to judge. We simply evaluate it and take necessary precautionary measures.
We've made clear that there is a chance for diplomacy if they do the right thing, but not if they don't.
We think it's time for them to switch lanes. We seek peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula, and we think that's in the best interest of everyone in the region.
Right after the shootings in Newtown, the NRA's Wayne LaPierre called for armed guards in the nation's schools. Today, the gun lobby details the recommendations of what it's calling the National School Shield Program.
Many components significantly scaled back equipment purchases and supply purchases, curtailed staff travel, reduced the use of air cards. Within the Executive Office of the President, several offices have sent furlough notices to their staff, including to 480 employees of the Office of Management and Budget.
I just try to react to something that I can hit. Nolasco's a great pitcher. He carved us up all year last year, and he carved me last year. So, being able to get 2 knocks off of him was, good for me. And I think, we saw him pretty well today. And I don't know if you're going to do that every time against him.
Before we get started, let me say NBC and I have reached a peaceful, amicable agreement that is both beneficial to both sides. April Fool! That's silly, ridiculous. Never happened.
Now, with common sense for the Commonwealth, here's John Fredericks. And it is Tuesday, April the 2nd, 2013. Glad you're here. John is on his continuing spring break. We are joined today again by the political editor of BearingDrift.com, Sean Kenny. Good morning, Sean.
Morning. How are you doing this day?
Doing terrific.
Outstanding, outstanding.
My Nats had a great win, 2-0 over the Miami Marlins. Bryce Harper, the youngest man in many, many decades to hit 2 home runs at the age of 20 in one game, much less opening day. And, of course, last night, as many people know here in Northern Virginia and the D.C. area, it was the final WWE Monday Night Raw before WrestleMania, and this town was packed with professional wrestlers. Unlike the wrestling that normally goes on Capitol Hill, it was quite an event last night at the Verizon Center, and not to let the cat out of the bag, but there were some pre-tapes that were done for SmackDown this week and other of the WWE's wrestling shows, and you're in, if that's your thing, you're in for a great week of pro wrestling programming as they head to WrestleMania in New York on Sunday. But
gotta watch your soaps, right?
Oh, absolutely. It is a male soap opera. It absolutely is a male soap opera. And last night, I think 7 of the biggest stars showed up and just blew the roof off the place. We're talking about The Rock, Brock Lesnar, John Cena, CM Punk. Shawn Michaels actually came back for a segment, which was nice, Triple H and so forth, and they all have matches or are involved in certain matches, but it was a great night last night. And one of the things that always gets me, this gets me at Nationals Park, and it gets me at the Verizon Center when we do it during a Capitals game, and I'm sure it gets to people around the Commonwealth when it happens in your local stadium or arena. We had a great contingent of National Guardsmen and National Guardswomen who were there, and when they salute the troops, the place goes wild. I love seeing that kind of tribute to the troops.
Awesome.
Indeed.
Well deserved.
Let me run down the quick schedule we have here before we get into the meat of the matter, and in this case, a hypothetical statistical lead, which we will we'll rip apart, but we'll get to that in a second. I'll tell you who's on the show with Sean and I today. We are very pleased to replay yesterday's Newsmaker of the Day, Delegate Rob Bell. That's our early riser replay at 6:40. Then we have a congressman who represents Virginia beautifully, as well as being a member of the House Financial Services Committee. Representative Robert Hurt from the 5th District will be with us at 7:10. Then we have our campaign trail feature, which will feature Anthony Reedy, the new executive director, and Garen Shipley, who is the communications director from the Republican Party of Virginia. Then at 8:10, we've got some clips of Governor McDonnell on Medicare expansion and school takeover that are very important. We need you to listen to that, especially if you are a parent here in the Commonwealth. And then at 8:40, we'll talk to Dr. Pamela Falk, the senior UN correspondent from CBS News. So that's how the show lines up. And we're all glad you're here, quite frankly, because without you, we're nothing. And without at least 3 more of you, we're not going to hit that 1,600 like level on our Facebook page. So get out there, click the like button, and spread the word. Now, Sean, this morning, some politics to chew on. According to a survey from the University of Mary Washington Center for Leadership and Media Studies, Senator Mark Warner holds a wide lead, in their words, over Governor Bob McDonnell in a hypothetical 2014 Senate matchup. While they say the Virginia gubernatorial race remains a dead heat, and that's what the new poll is all about, they give Warner, the Democrat, of course, a 16-point lead, 51% to 35%, over one of the most popular governors in the U.S., Bob McDonnell, among Virginia adults.
You start slicing and dicing it now. I mean,
Yeah.
here's the bottom line here.
Get in there with a knife and just open this thing up. It's going to bleed to death anyway.
Yeah, your RDI split on this: 27% Republicans, 35% Democratic, and then 33% Independent. So that means 2-1 overwhelmingly. You've got people left and leaning. You're very liberal, moderate. Divide right there. You're looking at 62% of the poll. So, of course, Mark Warner is going to do very well in a poll like that. Of course, you're going to get the answers you want. I mean, this is where you get to the famous Disraeli quote, and there's just 3 types of lies in this world: lies, damned lies, and statistics. Well, here we are. It's and then you actually start getting into some of the real meat and potatoes over here. It's the news yesterday when we went ahead and broke out with this poll. It was the gay marriage. It was 45% in favor, 46% opposed. Mm-hmm. And then you start getting down to some of the different questions on here. They withheld the first 18 questions, it appears, but you get down to the legal immigration question on here. The question is thinking about illegal immigration in the United States, do you support or oppose providing a way for legal immigrants or illegal immigrants currently in the country to gain legal citizenship if they pass background checks, pay fines, and have jobs? Support 71%, opposed 25%. That is an unprecedented number in American polling. Obviously, it's only representative of Virginians. And in that poll, 28% of the poll came from Northern Virginia, where this issue has been raging. I'm not so sure that I buy that number. I would think that would be a red flag in the poll right there.
Do you think that red flag is caused by the fact that where the University of Mary Washington is located, which is near Fredericksburg, that they made a short trip into the 2 or 3 counties just north of them, which are very heavily populated by Hispanics, especially Prince William County?
Perhaps so. I mean, I grew up in Fredericksburg. Fredericksburg's my
Sure.
hometown, so Mary Washington wasn't exactly known as a bastion of conservatism. It was much more known for other things. I think the bottom line here is that this is. You detect a little, knowing Mary Washington and then looking at the subsection of the polls and who was questioned and when they were questioned. This poll started on the 20th and went all the way to the 24th. So that means you start on a Wednesday and you end on a Sunday. And what are people doing on Wednesday? At least conservatives, they're at Bible study. And on Sunday, they're at church. So, that's where, you never do polling on Wednesdays. You never do polling over the weekends. You just that's one of those big no-nos you just don't do. And then you actually get to who is called. 1,000 individuals, 50% of them were cell lines. another half of them were landlines. Well, who
Yeah.
uses cell phones? Certainly, I mean, it's I mean, anybody who can afford the $100 a month and lives in suburban areas. So
exactly, and who actually has a landline in their home anymore, unless it's needed for one of those life alert bracelets, or if you just happen to get it in the bundle with your cable and so forth. I don't think I've used my landline in 3 or 4 years at this point.
It's the 1928 Gallup poll or 1932 Gallup poll, or you get the whole idea where everybody thinks everybody's voting for Hoover. Why? Because only certain people can afford those newfangled landline phones. You get to today in urban, suburban areas, cell phones are going to be used. In more rural and conservative areas, it's going to be your landline. So, again, I'd love to see some subsections of this poll. They don't give that to you with the Mary Washington poll, unfortunately, but some crosstabs would have been awful helpful.
Well, one of the comments that was made about the poll was that Governor McDonnell may trail Warner in that Senate race, but he still gets very strong marks in his current post. 52% of the respondents approve of the job he's doing as governor, compared to 26% who disapprove. I would also wonder, given the time frame that this poll was taken, weren't we coming to the end of the regular session where the transportation bill was high on everybody's list in terms of not being favorable to almost everybody? Let's put it this way. Almost everybody found fault with some element of that transportation bill.
Oh, sure. And thereabouts. I mean, there's another key thing to remember is that Governor McDonnell's approval ratings have typically been somewhere in the mid to high 60s. To have a poll come out there that says low 50s, that's a red flag there as well. When you get a 15-point swing in the gate, that tells you that something may not be right. Now, without crosstabs, we don't know who's punishing them for that. Obviously, it wouldn't be Democrats, it wouldn't be independents, it would be conservatives. And when you get down to the very bottom of their poll and ask the question, Tea Party affiliation, you only get 12% that are identifying with the Tea Party. So you can't tell me that that somehow there's this conservative backlash embedded in this poll. It was already sort of baked in. So I'm not so sure that crosstabs would have been extremely helpful in this poll. We don't have those, unfortunately. When you get a poll that's you get a thumb on the scale when it's tilted a little bit to the left, you're going to get the answers you want. And unfortunately, this is the danger of modern polling, where great as a lesson for students, but not necessarily something you want to base policy on.
And he did not jump at the bait when I asked him the question. Actually, I asked it of Maureen McDonnell, the First Lady. How would she redecorate the White House when they moved in January 2017? And Governor McDonnell just flat out said, "Don't take the bait, don't take the bait." But this particular poll says that if Governor McDonnell chooses to run for president in 2016, he would not be guaranteed to win Virginia in a Republican primary. The poll found that in a hypothetical six-way GOP matchup, I always love the hypotheticals, don't you? Mm-hmm. That New Jersey Governor Chris Christie would get 18%, McDonnell would get 12%, Representative Paul Ryan of Wisconsin and Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky get 11% apiece. Senator Marco Rubio of Florida takes 9%, and then former Governor Jeb Bush of Florida, who apparently feels that there's a lineage clause in the GOP platform, he gets 8%. So on the Democratic side, though, this is interesting. Warner takes 18% in a five-way primary matchup for president in 2016, behind Hillary Clinton's 38%. Vice President Biden takes 10%. Maryland Governor Martin O'Malley, hello to Czar O'Malley to the north of us, and New York Governor Andrew Cuomo bring up the rear, so to speak, with 3% apiece. And by the way, as always, the presidential questions were asked only of adults, and Virginians do not register by party, so primaries are open, as we know.
Of course, and then there's the real question: who answered what? And you get a bunch of moderates in a poll. Of course, they're going to lean towards Chris Christie. I mean, how does a governor with approval ratings in the mid in the mid 60s only get 12% of the vote for president? I'm not so sure I understand that. So, interesting numbers here. I'd love to see it backed up by other polling data, whether it's Roanoke or George Mason or anything like that. And it's really unfortunate we don't get too many of that in Virginia. I mean, you don't see too many Virginia colleges and universities really doing this sort of polling data. So, I mean, hats off to Mary Washington for actually dipping their toe in the pool. I mean, obviously you open yourself up to criticism whenever you step out and be a leader. But there's still. I have a number of questions with the poll. I'm not so sure it's a accurate reflection of reality, but it's a window, and I think that those things are always helpful at the end of the day.
Doesn't the University of Richmond have a good political center?
Oh, they do, as a matter of fact. But
love to see some data from them if they get out and beat the streets and ask questions in a proper fashion, wouldn't you?
Yeah, Richmond or George Mason. George Mason, I would trust instinctively, just because they've got such a great core there. They've got, Dr. Rozell's still there, as a matter of fact. So, excellent core right there. And they actually take this kind of stuff seriously. They eat it up, and they do it in a nonpartisan fashion.
Well, that's good. So we're not talking about Larry Sabato versus not Larry Sabato. In the gubernatorial race, as we wrap this portion of the poll up, businessman, as they call him in this particular rundown that the Washington Post provided, in the gubernatorial race, businessman Terry McAuliffe gets 38% of support, while Attorney General Ken Cuccinelli gets 37%. A statistical
Imagine that.
Yeah. And notably, the survey found almost no gender gap between the candidates. They were statistically tied among both men and women, and anything that came from outer space on the, on the Curiosity rover.
Which I'm sure just burns up the Democrats. I mean, this is one other thing they've been hammering. They can't win the election unless they win women. And when you have women actually splitting on Cuccinelli and saying, you know what, he's not that bad of a guy, this is where you start going back to the University of Virginia and things like that, and the things that he did over there. I mean, there's Sarah, which is a resource for abused women, something that Ken Cuccinelli actually got started in Charlottesville while he was at the University of Virginia.
Right.
So his background and the stuff that you're never going to see it on a campaign slick. You're never going to hear it in a radio ad. But some of the stuff that he actually did back in Charlottesville, that he's done just as part of who he is and what he really believes, you'd be surprised. He's there's a reason why women won't break on Cuccinelli, and it's because he really does care, and he really does believe he really does believe in women's rights and stands up for them in his own way, certainly. But it's nowhere near this quote unquote war on women that certain individuals in the Charlottesville area have perpetrated, namely local supervisors who are convicted of certain crimes. But that's all right.
As we look to yesterday's date, April 1st, April Fool's Day, the slugfest known as the Virginia governor's race managed to get into that holiday spirit. April Fool's Day, of course. Virginia gubernatorial candidate Terry McAuliffe announced a major commitment to bringing manufacturing jobs to Virginia, according to a press release issued yesterday from Ken Cuccinelli. Yes, and McAuliffe was not far behind with his missive as well on April Fool's Day. Does this stuff get into voters' heads? Does it really make an impact, or is it just one-upsmanship that is soon forgotten?
Of course, it's one-upsmanship. But look, that power plant, the car plant in Fredericksburg, for instance. I mean, again, grew up in the Fredericksburg area, right there on Route 2. There's an old transmission plant. Employed hundreds of individuals. It's closed. GM simply hasn't brought it back. So that sort of thing right there. Yeah, it is a little bit of one-upsmanship, but that's sort of kicking under the table. Totally expected in April. It'll get heavier as we get further closer to November anyway.
All right. Coming up on 1:30 here on the John Frederick Show, our window on the weather brought to you this morning by Soft Touch Dental Care. BestinSmile.com is where you need to go. 46 degrees right now, clear this morning with highs staying in the low 50s midday. Quite a change from yesterday. 41 degrees with highs in the mid-50s for Richmond and Central Virginia at our affiliate there, WLAE. 36 degrees, partly sunny with highs only in the low 50s in Lynchburg and Roanoke at WBRG. And 40 degrees with highs in the upper 40s in the nation's capital here at our flagship station, WTNT. On the way, our early riser replay. Delegate Rob Bell, one of the two candidates for the GOP nomination for Attorney General. Common Sense News Time coming up on 6:30. Now, Commonwealth headlines with our own Ken Johnson. Good morning, Ken.
Morning, everybody. U.S. Senator Tim Kaine met with several military veterans and spouses yesterday at Old Dominion University to discuss the long-range effects of military budget cuts. While service members say they can deal with lengthy deployments, regular changes in duty stations, and even risk their lives in combat for their country, if Congress can't come up with a more consistent and predictable process for funding the military, more and more service members are going to start heading for the exits. The group sounded off on several issues, including Veterans Affairs backlogs and ineffective military-to-civilian transition programs. Some spouses complained about a lack of information about how federal budget cuts will affect sailors and Marines this year and beyond. Kaine, who also made stops at Langley Air Force Base in Hampton and Oceana Naval Air Station in Virginia Beach, said he plans to press Department of Defense officials for more details next week during a hearing before the Senate Armed Services Committee. A Fairfax County judge has ruled in favor of 4 Sikh men who challenged a Virginia law that requires them to pay $500 to perform marriage ceremonies. The law exempts ordained ministers from various faiths from posting the bond to perform weddings, but the Sikh men said the law discriminates against them because their faith has no ordained ministers. Judge Dennis Smith sided with the Sikhs, saying the requirement to post a bond is unconstitutional, an infringement on freedom of religion, and ordered that the men be licensed to perform marriages without having to pay the fee. A key prosecution witness yesterday described the special relationship he and his business partner had with the Norfolk-based Bank of the Commonwealth in the years leading up to its collapse in 2011. 5 defendants, including the defunct bank's top executives, are accused of conspiring to defraud the bank out of $71 million. Eric Menden, who with his partner George Hranowski pleaded guilty to fraud charges last year, testified that the pair were known as friends of the bank, a status that allowed them to get loans at very low interest rates with no down payment, to regularly overdraw their checking accounts, and to be chronically late making loan payments. Menden, a real estate developer, said that in turn, he and his partner did favors for bank executives, treating them to gifts and free lunches. Menden is serving 11 years in federal prison and hopes that by testifying against bank executives, he will get his sentence reduced. Backers of Virginia's candidates for governor exchanged some hard-edged humor for April Fool's Day. Republican Attorney General Ken Cuccinelli's campaign issued a release under the headline, "McAuliffe to Open Job-Rich Plant in Virginia," which claimed that Terry McAuliffe had announced a major commitment to bringing manufacturing jobs to Virginia, and that Green Tech, his electric car company, would soon open a factory outside Fredericksburg. Then, under a headline of April Fools, the statement noted that McAuliffe chose to base his electric car company in Mississippi. The Democratic Party of Virginia responded in kind, issuing a prank release that falsely claimed Cuccinelli had resigned as Attorney General, with a statement that read, "Issues like his conflict of interest with drug company Star Scientific and his ideological attacks on the bipartisan transportation compromise are making it impossible for him to do his job impartially." However, a different April Fool's Day joke ended with an arrest in Hampton. Police were called to the Waffle House on Mercury Boulevard for a report of a robbery. Officers who responded determined that the report was an April Fool's Day joke, but they weren't in a laughing mood, and arrested 20-year-old Susan Alexandria Tinker. She is charged with falsely summoning police, a Class 1 misdemeanor, which can result in up to a year in prison and or a $2,500 fine. Just really wasn't all that funny, was it? State and local news brought to you by the Chris Weaver Real Estate Team, your Virginia real estate leader, recognized by the Wall Street Journal as a top 100 team. Want to buy, sell, or lease? Call Chris Weaver. ChrisWeaver.com. KRISWeaver.com.
With common sense for the Commonwealth, it's the John Fredericks Morning Show. Like us on Facebook. Follow John on the new Twitter handle @JF Radio Show, and online, the website, thejohnfredericksshow.com. Listen online anywhere, anytime at washingtontimes.com/listen. And make a note of the new call-in number, toll-free at 888-480-JOHN. That's 888-480-5646. Now, with common sense for the Commonwealth, here's John Fredericks. And coming up on 6:40 now here on the John Fredericks Show, Steve Ray in this morning and all week actually, as John is on his spring break, and our guest host today is the political editor for BearingDrift.com, Sean Kenny. And once again, we turn to Sean for a great interview from yesterday, our early riser replay. For those who can't listen to the entire program, by the way, it's brought to you by Paradigm Law PLC, helping Virginia homeowners prevent foreclosure. Get them online at legalforeclosureexpert.com or call 703-651-6811. Sean's interview with the newsmaker yesterday was with Delegate Rob Bell, one of two candidates for the Attorney General position here in Virginia. This is from yesterday's show, The John Frederick Show.
Great to have you on the show, Rob.
I said I'm one of the few people that know you first as a supervisor.
Exactly.
As we know you as a delegate as well.
That's right. Well, good. Nice to talk to you. Happy Easter and happy April Fool's Day.
Well, thank you very much.
By the way, and it is no April Fool's, this is Sean's birthday.
No kidding.
Another trip around the sun. It's one of the cruelest strokes ever played on a human being, but there it is.
Either that or having a birthday on Christmas where you only get one set of presents.
Well, maybe so, but April Fool's Day in a Catholic school.
Oh,
how do you think I survived as a small child? I don't know.
That explains the ruler marks on your knuckles.
Well, they heal.
There you go.
They heal.
Delegate Rob Bell is here, of course, because he is one of two candidates on the GOP side who is running for the top cop position, the Attorney General position here in the Commonwealth in this next election cycle. And I'm going to lead off and then hand it over to Sean. Most of the Republican guests that we've had on, and a few of the Democrats as well, have said very clearly, between you and Mark Obenshain, you have two very qualified, two very friendly, personable guys, either one of whom could be the next Attorney General and do that job in fine fashion. For those people who haven't heard one of the 2 or 3 interviews we've done with you previous, please lay out, and you don't have to break the 11th Reagan commandment of talking ill about a fellow Republican. That's not what I'm looking for here. What are the major differences between you and Mark Obenshain for those who still haven't made up their mind?
Well, the way that I've generally described it is, I'm not going to speak about Mark. Let me just say something that I bring to the table.
Mm-hmm.
And what it is I have a law enforcement background. And I was a prosecutor in Orange County, Virginia for 5 years, did 2,400 cases, spent time visiting crime victims at their houses, talked to them at my office, worked with the police. And it was my job to help prosecute those cases. And I think that does two things. I think it has given me sort of an experience and background that has helped me be a better public safety advocate in the General Assembly. And so if you look at the bills I've done things on repeat offense drunk drivers that came directly from my experience as a prosecutor. It was the bill that said that if you're a sex offender of a certain type, you can't go on school property. That was my bill. We had the bill that expanded protective orders. That came out of my experience as a prosecutor. The most recent public safety bill that we're especially proud of was we looked at the men who commit serious sex crimes against children under 12, and we saw that the sentences were far too short and they were reoffending. And so it was my bill, and I said, we will give you a life sentence, no exceptions, no excuses, if you rape a child who's 12 or under. That passed. That's the law of the land. So I think, if you're going to be the top cop, it's a useful skill to have been a cop. The second thing is it will help me beat Mark Herring, and the experience that I have is something he doesn't have. He's never prosecuted so much as a traffic ticket, and it shows in his legislative record. And the example of there are many examples that he has voted foolishly on public safety bills, but I'll just pick one. There was a bill that said that felons currently, if you're a contractor, you can't bring felons onto school property. It's just we don't want them around the kids. So if you're fixing the roof, providing janitor service, if you're the one who gives the food to the cafeteria and you're a contractor, you cannot have felons coming onto school property. And he voted for a bill to change that, to make it easier, actually make it possible for the contractor to bring felons onto school property. And the kind of felons you can bring onto school property under the bill he voted for were things like drug dealers who deal drugs to kids.
My goodness.
And
now,
I assume it's because he doesn't know what he's doing. I assume it's because he didn't read the bill or doesn't understand the bill. But it was a very short bill, and that's all the bill did, and he voted for it. So I think that the law enforcement background that I have will make it easy to draw a comparison that Virginia voters like.
Now, before I hand you over to Sean, I want to point out to people who are not familiar with Orange County, that is the county smack dab between Culpeper and Fredericksburg. It's a major growth area. So you've got that in terms of your resume and how that will translate to the statewide office. But another thing a lot of people don't realize is that you are very, very keen on mental health reform issues, and I don't think it's something we've talked about on the show yet.
No, that was something that sort of fell into my lap. I was the chairman of the subcommittee when Virginia Tech occurred, we had there were multiple ways that could have gone, and obviously there was a strong push for let's focus on the gun. And I said, among others, that's not really where the problem is. The problem is our mental health laws, and we had a gentleman who was profoundly mentally ill and had been identified as such and had even gone before a special magistrate and ordered into treatment. And yet when he didn't go, nothing happened. And then, of course, he got worse and worse, and finally, they call it decompensating, but obviously killed more than 30 people. And so we went through a thoroughgoing, it was the largest set of reforms in decades, of how we handle people who are profoundly mentally ill and a danger to themselves or somebody else. And the primary thing was we looked at how did he slip between the cracks? What were the mistakes we made? That was sort of the first reform, was fixing that. And there are no doubt other problems with the system, but we think at least with regard to the mistakes and problems that led to Mr. Cho not getting treatment, we think we got those fixed. And then the second was recognition that many people who are mentally ill can feel themselves slipping. In other words, we don't have to wait until it's a police issue and people come to the house. You can often, if you give them a place to go, they can catch them. So we've really tried to do these, what they call crisis stabilization units, CSUs. And what it is would be, you're on meds, but the meds, you've gone off your meds, but you can feel yourself becoming paranoid or whatever the issue that you have is. You check yourself in, and they're not locked down, but they have a nurse, and they give you a quiet place, and they help you get your meds stabilized, and after a few days you can go back out into the community. We've had good luck with those two. And so you have sort of those two parts working together, and then, of course, you can take it a step further and say try to find ways that even before you get there, we have better oversight through the community service boards. If you can figure out a way to do all three, that will largely help the problems that we've had. And so that's what we're trying to do.
Sure. Delegate Bell, let me go ahead and move over away from mental health reform,
sure.
Which you've done admirable work there, and move over to some of the top of the ticket issues. Obviously, Ken Cuccinelli has come out with regards to restoring the rights of nonviolent felons. There's many in the minority community that have been clamoring for that. Obviously, minority outreach has been a real concern. My question is what is your position on that? And would you support Cuccinelli's position on restoring the voting rights for nonviolent felons?
Well, we do have a difference on this. Let's be let's be clear what the current law is. Right now, Virginia you lose your voting rights, your rights to sit on a jury, your right to run for office. We call them your civil rights. You lose them when you are convicted of a felony. Virginia has a process in place right now where you can apply for restoration of rights. And what happens is you can apply through the governor's office. If it's there's certain categories of it. If it's the nonviolent felonies, it's a fairly simple and straightforward process. If it's a violent felony, he asks you to file more paperwork to show that you're going in the right direction. But they're taken up on a case-by-case basis. I prefer that approach. I think that there should absolutely be a way that you can get your rights back, but I don't like an automatic approach. Let me just tell you why. The whole criminal justice system is based on a case-by-case individual approximation. We don't just say, well, you were charged with shoplifting, you were charged with this, you were charged with that. We look at your case individually to see whether you did it, and then there's a range of punishments for most crimes, and they base it based on what they think you did. I think the same approach makes sense on the back end, which would be some people who have committed crimes have learned their lesson, turned their lives around, gotten their act together. They're the ones that come up to me in the street as a former prosecutor and introduce themselves and, hey, Mr. Bell, I want to tell you how I'm doing. And it's always a great conversation. It means they're doing good. There are other people that use jail or prison as we say, a finishing school for crime. Yes. And they go in and they get better and they learn new techniques and they make new friends that we wish they hadn't. And I do not like the idea of treating them the same.
Sure.
I think the notion that you treat those that have turned their lives around exactly the same as the people that are intent on committing additional crimes, it doesn't make sense from a conservative perspective. We think we should have individual accountability, and if you've got your life together, that's great, and we'll help you along the way. But if you haven't, I don't see why we should treat you the same as somebody else.
Let me ask you a little bit of a different question. This is more of philosophical rather than a political one. But there's always this concern when you get from the law and order wing it's sort of it's the old Ciceronian quote, summum meus summum injuria. It's the maximum.
I went
law.
To Catholic school, but it sounds like you took more Latin than me.
A little bit, but it's maximum law is maximum injury. Is a pretty literal translation of it, meaning that sometimes we can go a little bit too far. How would you define your balance as you're going around your Virginia's top cop? Obviously there's always a tendency to, you always hear the extreme, it's like put people in jail for jaywalking and kind of thing. Obviously that's not where we're heading right now, but how do you really set the tone, or how do you really define that punishments appropriately fit the crime?
Oh, well, I mean, that is I think a fundamental conversation about how we do criminal law, and it's something we look at a lot. It is easy. Let's just talk about writing the law in the first place. It is always easy to catch the guilty person. You just cast the net bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger until you can catch them.
Right.
The hard part is to try to draft a law that catches the guilty person without catching too many innocent people. That's always the goal. And I'll give you an example. We had a bill that we worked on this year, and it was about a 3-year project for financial exploitation of seniors. And everybody says, oh my gosh, what a terrible crime. You have these hustlers, whether it be the contractor who says he'll blacktop her driveway and then claims that the tree is going to fall into her house, and before she knows it, she's written a $15,000 check. Or, frankly, more typically, it's the family member that takes grandma for a car, and then a week later comes in and says, gosh, I need help with a car, and another week says, I need help with a car, that kind of thing. Both of those happen. But so we looked at other states. Well, other states would have cast the net so broadly it would have caught in the family member who's just trying to help, and or wouldn't let grandma make any additional purchases. It literally wouldn't let her buy a car for her grandson, even if she wanted to. And so we worked, and the goal again, it was easy to get. You could have said, anytime anyone gets money from someone over 65, they have committed a crime, and some of the early versions were pretty close to that. That then doesn't make any sense. You're
That's
catching
pretty broad
you're
net.
catching all sorts of innocent content.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so instead we worked, and the final version we actually took it to the Crime Commission because this was such a sort of we after trying twice to try to get it right during the session, we just said this is something we're not going to get right with such a short schedule. But we said we will only punish you if you get it through. First off, they've got to be mentally incapacitated because obviously many seniors are not incapacitated at all. Then you have to get it through that mental incapacity. We're not just going to say that if someone who's mentally incapacitated gives money to something or some charity or some such, that's necessarily criminal. Sure. Those are the things you're trying to balance. And then on the sentencing side, you're trying to balance sort of the harm done versus the deterrent effect versus what we call the incapacity effect, which would be it's also called specific deterrent, which would be it's not trying to deter the next guy in line, it's trying to deter you because you think you yourself are such a repeat offense criminal. And sometimes those are in contradiction. I'll give you an example. The serious crime that has the lowest recidivism rate always surprises people, and it's homicide. And,
really?
Well,
really?
Yeah, and of course
that is surprising.
Well, but you think about it. Take away killings for sort of professional killings, and what you have are a lot of people that want to kill one person. You're no good cheating husband, and having killed your no good cheating husband, the chance of you having another no good cheating husband that you will have to kill is pretty modest. But nobody says, well, goodness, since the recidivism rate is so low, we need to not worry about that crime.
I guess you run out of husbands at some point in time.
Hopefully the next husband will know better.
Exactly. Let me go ahead and I'm going to switch gears.
Let me finish real quick.
Oh, sure.
There are other crimes that are less serious but very high recidivism rate, where you essentially have professional criminals. The example they always use is car thieves. They see this as a business, and they see going to jail as just the cost of going to business. And so you try to figure out the right punishment for the offense based on the badness of the offense, plus some notion of recidivism and deterrence.
Common Sense News Time coming up on 8:25 here on the John Frederick Show. Executive producer Steve Ray in this week, along with a series of guest hosts this morning and tomorrow, of course. Political editor of BearingDrift.com, Sean Kenny, is with us, and we're speaking with Delegate Rob Bell, of course, one of the two candidates for the GOP nomination for Attorney General. And Delegate Bell, as we head towards Wednesday, which is the beginning of the special session, I want you to talk about your success in getting through the bill that pertains to these predatory human traffickers, your House Bill 1870, which I believe has now been signed into law.
Yeah, I'm real happy with that. And what you have, just human trafficking, I'm not sure everybody knows what we're talking about. Human trafficking are the guys who cruise shopping malls and middle schools and bus stations and look for sad and lonely girls, almost not all girls, but sad and lonely children, often girls.
Yep.
And they promise them a different life. And they say, oh, your dad really is a jerk, isn't he? Well, listen, I can show you a glamorous life in wherever, but far away. Let's get you out of here.
Mm-hmm.
And my wife taught high school and all of us were teenagers once, there were times in most of our lives where somebody promised us a chance to get away and they caught us at just the right moment. Most of us, many people would have at one point said, oh, I can't wait to get out of here. Nobody understands me. Nobody loves me.
Right,
I want
right.
to go. That's what human trafficking is. And, of course, what they find once they get away from their family and friends and the guy takes their cell phone and he's the only one providing food and rent, is prostitution. I mean, that's the vast majority of that, what they call human trafficking, is the sex trade. That's the group we're talking about, and these are truly bad people.
These are probably the sickest crimes that you'll come across besides homicides and so forth, because they are truly predatory.
That's right, and it's we have sex crimes where the predator does the act himself. This is just by a different mechanism. It is every bit as bad. It's just by a different mechanism. And again, so what we found, of course, is that they are trying to get them away from their home, and so as more than many crimes. Long story short, the bill allows them to be investigated through multi-jurisdictional grand juries, which allows you to be in more than one jurisdiction at a time. It makes it easier to sort of investigate and prosecute these cases. These cases are specifically about getting the kids away from their home, so they are very commonly not in just a single jurisdiction. And so with this multi-jurisdictional grand jury, makes it easier to investigate. That's what it does.
Delegate Rob Bell has been with us here on the John Frederick Show. I can't thank you enough for the time, and I have made a note that tomorrow at 7:10, one of your endorsers, 5th Congressional District Congressman Robert Hurt, will be with us. Have you picked up any new endorsements along the way here as you are in the final glide path to May 18th?
Oh, sure. And we pick up the sort of elected officials and grassroots officials. The Southampton chair endorsed me on Saturday when I was down at his mass meeting. But the ones I'm really proud of are some of the people fighting for the Constitution right now, sort of the frontline fighters. And Dick Heller, he's the man who sued Washington, D.C. over their gun laws and won.
Yes.
He has endorsed me. Bob Wilson, who is the gentleman whose Norfolk property is being taken by the city to make a movie theater, basically, he's endorsed me. And then Martha Bonita, who is the lady up in Fauquier who has been threatened with a $5,000 fine.
Yeah. That was an amazing case. My goodness.
Extraordinary. Anyway, she has endorsed me. They have all said, we want him to be the Attorney General to fight for our constitutional rights, and I'm humbled and honored to be the person they've endorsed. Those are three that are sort of real people on top of all the like you say, Congressman Hurt, the elected officials, and the local party officials.
Thank you so much for the time. The website is Rob Bell 4AG. That's F-O-R, by the way. Rob Bell, FORAG.com. You have an appearance coming up in the next day or so?
Oh, we're doing every day. Yeah.
Just cast a net and you'll find Rob Bell somewhere here in the great Commonwealth of Virginia. Thank you so much, Delegate. We appreciate the time as always.
Yeah, thanks, Rob.
You bet. Bye.
There you go. That is our early riser replay from yesterday here on the John Frederick Show. On the way for us, Congressman Robert Hurt from the 5th District. By the way, today's John Frederick Show brought to you by Ending Spending, focused like a laser beam on finding solutions to the nation's crippling fiscal and debt crisis. Two strong, unwavering fiscal conservatives like Ken Cuccinelli and Pete Snyder have their support. They'll move Virginia forward, expanding the economy and creating jobs. To learn more, visit endingspending.com. That's endingspending.com. This message paid for by endingspending.com. It is now 6:59.